Afterword Volume 1, Telesias the War Dance. Author's note, unveiling the blank pages and challenging Athenian bias. Writing Alexein, a Great Argead Saga, specifically its sprawling opening volume Telesias. The War Dance has been an astonishingly long and complex journey. When I first set out, I had no true comprehension of how intricate historical fiction could be. Unlike my past modern era novels, where creative license runs completely unchecked, historical fiction occupies a strange, demanding middle ground. You are bound by the rigid framework of the record, yet forced to navigate vast silent voids where history simply forgot to write. The traditional historical record is overwhelmingly a chronicle of men's conquests, heroism, military accomplishments, and the brutal rise and fall of nations and dynasties. Within those glorious and inspirational sparks, entire worlds exist in shadow. Women and associated individuals who shaped the human reality of these eras are frequently missing, vanished from the grand scenes of statecraft. To be entirely honest, I was never an admirer or a fan of Alexander the Great, not at all. In fact, my decision to write his legacy was born out of sheer frustration, not fascination or obsession. One of my oldest friends, Ron, whom I first met back in 1993, on Capitol Hill in Seattle, has harbored a lifelong obsession with Alexander. Every single person on this planet seems to have their own private fixations, and for Ron, it has always been the young Macedonian conqueror. For over 3 decades, across more than a quarter of a century, he talked to me about him. Then, during a lunch at Olive Garden, when he brought him up yet again, a sudden spark of curiosity hit me. Why? To him and countless others, this figure was endlessly captivating. But to me, he wasn't. I figured I must be missing something everyone else saw. My mind is deeply logical and analytical. If I am to understand something, I need to examine it through clear, diverse lenses, rather than just accepting a myth at face value. Right there at the table, I made up my mind to genuinely listen and start asking real questions. Yet, even then, I wasn't moved. I remained frustrated. What am I missing? Naturally, my knowledge of Greek history was sparse at best, limited to vague, shallow narratives of Alexander's accomplishments. Movies and documentaries had failed to make it make sense. Objectively, the standard narrative felt hollow, as if huge vital pieces of the young conqueror's life and truth were being deliberately hidden. That frustration pushed me onto the internet. Thank goodness for the digital age, no need to constantly run to physical libraries, take endless handwritten memos, or wait for books to ship. Everything was just a click away. But diving into the digital archives made things explosive and deeply confusing. Digesting centuries of historical scholarship, ancient primary accounts, and modern academic debates was an immense challenge for a newcomer to classical history. I quickly realized that to understand Alexander, I couldn't just look at the end of the puzzle. I had to find its origins first. I had to look at his parents, his father, King Philip II, and his mother, Olympias. But the stereotypical narrative surrounding them only added to my confusion. Objectively, the traditional picture of this family made zero sense. A drunken, cowardly, arrogant father, bitterly jealous of his brilliant son, an insanely obsessive, wicked and vicious mother, and a son who suddenly leads an army into Asia Minor, conquers the Persian king, and runs toward the edge of the known world just to escape her shadow. There was definitively something massive missing. When I dug backward into Philip's and Olympias' lives, I found the early historical record nearly blank. History had left almost nothing about their youth. But then I stumbled upon a fascinating, pivotal detail. At 14 years old, Philip was sent to Thebes as a political hostage, alongside other noble boys. I smelled something there. I knew nothing about Thebes at the time, so I began researching it in depth. I discovered that in the 4th century BCE, Thebes was a staggering military and geopolitical powerhouse, anchored by the legendary Sacred Band. And then it hit me. I began to understand the true geopolitical dynamics of the era. Thebes didn't just hold Philip hostage, they forged him. They molded the boy who would eventually become the ruler of all Greece, laying the foundation that Alexander would later inherit to venture into Asia Minor and become a legend. As I dug deeper into Philip's formative Theban years, I became utterly fascinated by the key architects of that era. The brilliant Theban general Epaminondas, his partner Pelopidas, their close commander Pamines, and the invincible sacred band itself. I realized then that this was where the true story lay. This was the very origin of the legend. When mapping out the historical landscape of 4th century BCE Greece, you quickly realize a fascinating paradox. Thanks to the towering legacy of the Theban hegemony, generals like Epaminondas and Pelopidas, and the legendary sacred band, the political and military history of Thebes during this era is recorded quite extensively. The geopolitical dynamics of central Greece are well documented. Yet, when you look toward Macedonia, the life of the young Prince Philip during his time in Thebes is an absolute blank. History tells us that Philip was sent to Thebes around 368 BCE, staying there for 3 to 4 years depending on academic debates. But the exact date and manner of his return to Pella are frustratingly unrecorded. This stark contrast between a well-documented Thebes and a silent Macedonian prince became the ultimate creative spark for my novel. The sequence of events, beginning with the assassination of Philip's eldest brother, King Alexander II, and culminating in the young prince being sent off as a political hostage, provided all the motivation I needed to start writing. Even though the historical records covering the assassination and the march to Thebes were dangerously vague and fragmented, I decided to venture into them headfirst. As I dug deeper, I encountered a major obstacle. The primary historical records from this period were predominantly written by Athenian writers, a half-century or more after Alexander the Great's death. At first, I didn't doubt these Athenian accounts, but the more I examined them, the more they began to smell. Their narrative simply did not make logical sense. As I scrutinized the inconsistencies, it became obvious that much of it was a fraudulent narrative, tainted by intense political bias, and crafted more like theatrical, cheap soap opera dynasty drama for entertainment than a genuine preservation of historical truth. They viewed history strictly through their own biased lens, casting Macedonia through a condescending prejudice filter. In my very first draft stage, I tried writing along with these traditional Athenian narratives. It completely failed. The story lacked life and truth. I realized I had to scrap what I had written and start over. That realization triggered a serious, in-depth, and multifaceted historical research campaign because Macedonian history had clearly been distorted and fragmented by ancient political spin. To see the reality clearly, my research had to expand far beyond Thebes, Athens, and Macedonia, branching out into the surrounding nations, Illyria, Thessaly, Epirus, and the Persian Empire. Volume 1 begins with the assassination of Alexander II, leading directly to Philip being sent to Thebes with the other noble boys to begin a terrifying new life. Writing the baseline narrative for that journey wasn't too difficult, but a simple road trip didn't hold enough narrative weight to fill a whole volume. I needed to weave in richer, multi-layered subplots. First, I looked at Olympias' early life, another space that is entirely blank in the historical record. Then I realized something glaringly obvious that I had completely omitted in my first draft. After a king is assassinated, there must be a funeral. I added an in-depth funeral march, even though history left almost no records of its specific details. Next, the Illyrians emerged in my mind. Historically, the Illyrians are entirely inseparable from Macedonian history, particularly regarding their perpetual conflicts with Macedon, Epirus, and neighboring states. Writing the Illyrian elements was far harder than writing the journey south. In my first draft, the Illyrians were very vague shadow figures, so I went back and built them up in depth, knowing they would inevitably return to clash with Perdiccas III, and later with Philip II. As my immersion into this era deepened, historical figures like the Athenian general Iphicrates came into focus. That historical spark gave birth to a major creative turning point, the fictional Battle of Haliacmon. While history records internal usurpers and northern threats, it does not record a massive pitched battle involving an allied Athenian fleet and army at that exact moment. I made a conscious, creative decision to stage this fictional battle to showcase the terrifying might of Athenian maritime fleets operating in conjunction with land forces. More importantly, it served a thematic purpose. It became the experimental crucible, where young Philip first observes traditional Greek warfare and begins formulating the tactical ideas that would eventually evolve into his revolutionary long pike, the legendary sarissa. far outreaching any weapon the Athenians or Spartans ever fielded. Because this fictional clash of Haliacmon stands as the sole major military set piece in Volume 1, I executed it to feel massive, brutal, and utterly transformative. The exact moment where a hostage prince stops being a passive observer and starts calculating how to conquer the world that tried to crush him. Furthermore, this battle served another vital purpose: introducing the vast maritime landscape of the Aegean Sea, dominated by Athenian power, laying the groundwork for the future creation of the Theban fleet. In upcoming narratives, the world of Alexein will expand far beyond land campaigns into a sweeping pan-Hellenic era of maritime dominance. Moving from that funeral march to the Battle of Haliacmon, and then onward to the march toward Thebes, I felt I needed even more subplots: Aristotle, a Piraeus, young Olympias and her family, and the Thessalian tyrant. Still wanting deeper thematic texture, I carefully crafted original fictional characters in Athens' Lysandra, also known as Semele, Menander, and Demetrius, to anchor future narratives, alongside a young Aristotle. These fictional characters walk alongside Philip, Aristotle, and Olympias. This powerful women's duo of Olympias and Semele will walk together for many long years to come. In order to write Olympias' evolution from the young princess Polysena through her spiritual side, she needed a mentor. Thus, Semele was born. And then there is another vital fictional character, the Pythia, the crown jewel of all Hellas, whose role expands heavily in volumes 2 and 3 and beyond. I introduced her here as a profound prelude in volume 1. The first draft was heavily upgraded, edited, rewritten, and expanded with new episodes and extensive details. As I worked, the entire geopolitical landscape of the Greek world snapped into sharp focus. I layered in deeper perspectives on Athens, Sparta, Illyria, Thessaly, Epirus, and Persia, transforming what began as a tightly focused Theban and Macedonian narrative into a sweeping pan-Hellenic panorama. While Volume 1's first draft focused almost entirely on Philip, it evolved into a multi-character tapestry with Philip at its center. Its baseline remained the military and geopolitical landscape, but I wanted to deeply incorporate Greek myth, legend, and the vibrant cultural, spiritual, and religious practices of the era, such as the Dionysian festivals and mystery cults, which align much more closely with my personal writing strengths than dry military history alone. Alexein, a Great Argead Saga, is not merely a tale of men's conquests. It is the story of the women who stood beside them, bridging the gap between brutal military and geopolitical reality and a profound spiritual dimension. I hope you enjoyed listening to Volume 1, Telesias, the War Dance. Continue with me into Volume 2, Hieros, Lochos, the Sacred Band, whose first draft is already written. I will do my absolute best to craft it as historical fiction, rooted in real historical events, with a deeply multi-layered story. Sincerely, Makāula Nakae. Continues to Volume 2, A Great Argead Saga, Alexein. Volume 2, Hieros, Lochos, the Sacred Band. Young Philip and his royal pages walk into the heavily guarded confines of the Theban Cadmea, entering the seven-gated city as high-stakes political hostages. Here they undergo rigorous training, receiving a comprehensive education spanning military tactics, geopolitical maneuvering, philosophy, art, music, and poetry, all designed to forge the next generation of leaders to stand beside the young King Perdiccas III. To the outside world, they are viewed merely as pawns or potential weapons for a military machine. Yet, Philip and his companions soon realize that what initially felt like a cage in Thebes is actually an eye-opening awakening. It shatters their narrow Macedonian worldview, introducing them to a vast pan-Hellenic arena. While Thebes grapples with shifting powers, as Illyrians turn their gaze toward Epirus, and the Thessalian tyrant goes on a rampage across Thessaly, forcing General Pelopidas into the looming Thessalian tempest, geopolitical landscape fractures further. Athens works to recover its naval might, prompting General Epaminondas to build a Theban fleet. To fund this maritime expansion, Pelopidas ventures east to parley with the King of Kings in Persia, seeking the gold needed to tip the balance of power. Amidst this rising turbulence, Philip and Princess Polysena of Epirus meet upon the heights of Delphi, where the Pythia, the crown jewel of all Hellas, foresees the future and watches the chess pieces move. Meanwhile, Aristotle faces fresh intellectual battles against Athenian academic resistance, and Lysandra and Menander expand their mission across the pan-Hellenic landscapes of the Aegean. As Persian gold is redistributed to deliberately throw the Greek city-states into a state of chaos, Alexein, a Great Argead Saga, Volume 2, Hieros Lochos, the Sacred Band, enters its next challenging chapter. Here, at the true origin of the legend, the seeds of conquest are planted in the fertile soils of Thebes, Thessaly, and Macedonia, setting the stage for a pan-Hellenic crusade where Alexander the Great and his ultimate military machine will eventually march into Asia Minor and see the end of the known world. Listen to the full saga now. A new episode coming soon. Watch and listen now Volume 1, Telesias, the War Dance. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Bookmark Volume 1, Telesias playlist. And Divine Oracle playlist. A new episode will drop every single day until the epic conclusion of Volume 2. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Subscribe to follow the bloody rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below.